What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So with spring practice now underway, I finally wanted to start looking at some of the biggest questions surrounding different programs across the country and how I think those questions will ultimately be answered in the end of spring and heading into fall camp and things like that, heading into next season as a whole. And I want this video specifically to focus in on the Arkansas Razorbacks, who are, to me, a very interesting team to watch in this upcoming season, because if they can improve from where they were last year, then they can make a legitimate push to be an SEC championship level contender. Not saying that's what they will be, but that is the ceiling on this team right now. And so these questions will go a long way in determining what they actually look like next year. So let's go ahead and get into it with question number one. My first question is KJ Jefferson the guy? And to me, this question is the biggest because it determines the ceiling for this team and this program going forward. KJ was one of the most underrated players in college football last season, and he was arguably the biggest reason for Arkansas's improved record and newfound success on the field last year. KJ will need to improve even more heading into this upcoming year if Arkansas really wants to elevate their program even more, beyond that 9-10 win type season that they had last year. If they want to take that next step and compete with the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world, and even at this point the Texas A&Ms of the world more consistently, they're going to really have to, get a lot of outstanding quarterback play out of KJ Jefferson. They're going to need truly elite QB play from him, because they're not just going to have the talent to just out-roster teams like a Georgia did last year, or even like an Alabama does pretty often. They just aren't going to have that kind of talent in Arkansas. They might against non-SEC teams, but against the other teams in the SEC, Arkansas is not just going to line up and be better than them across the board. And so to make up for that, they're going to need like nearly Heisman-level quarterback play, in my opinion. And I think KJ could legitimately be that good of a quarterback if he continues to improve going forward and really maximizes his potential. And this spring's going to be our first real shot to see if he has the ability to do that and if he really will do that. I'm not sure if he's quite going to reach Heisman level or anything like that, but I expect him to have an even better season this upcoming year than he had last year, and I think that's really going to help raise the Arkansas program going forward in the long run. But specifically for this season, I think his improvements will be noticeable, and I think they will be a large portion in determining how far Arkansas goes next season. That brings me to the number two question I have, and that is, how will they replace their lost talent? And most of the lost talent for Arkansas to be concerned about is at the wide receiver spot in the form of Treylon Burks, and then at the middle linebacker spot with the losses of Hayden Henry and Grant Morgan. And as far as wide receiver is concerned, Arkansas has talent there, but they're going to need to find a true go-to wide receiver like Burks was last season. And there are a few options they could turn to. The first is incoming transfer Jaden Hazelwood, who has all of the talent in the world. Former 5-star, went to Oklahoma, now transfers here to Arkansas, but he's been underwhelming in his time at the college game thus far, and that's partially due to injury, and it's also partially due to being in a very crowded receiver room in Oklahoma. But regardless of all that, he has looked great in camp so far, and he should have more than enough raw ability and talent to be a playmaker this upcoming season. And then behind him, there are guys like Keyshawn Jackson Jr. and Warren Thompson, who should have a real shot to take over as the number one guy at wide receiver as well. And those guys are both, they were on the team last year. They're both going to be very important roles regardless. But either one of them could really step up and take over that Treylon Burks type of role as well. Even if they're not in the same mold as him, just that go-to guy that, KJ in particular can rely on to go to. The offense can play call for when they're struggling, things like that. They're going to have to find that guy that they can rely on. And now for the linebacker spot, there are a multitude of names that will be interesting to watch. Bumper Poole is going to certainly be a starter once again for Arkansas. He should be seen as a consistent and highly reliable option to lead the group going forward. But behind him, you're going to have at least two linebackers on the field there at all times, two off-ball linebackers. And so redshirt freshman Christopher Paul currently looks like the leader at that spot. for the other starting spot beside Bumper Pool. But Jordan Crook also has a shot to see significant playtime at this point, this spot too, heading into this season, and he's getting good playtime in spring. There are even more guys behind them as well that will be interesting to watch. It's also going to be very intriguing to see how and where Alabama transfer linebacker Drew Sanders works in as well, because he's, will he be used more as an inside linebacker, or will he be used out on the edge, or will he be used in more of a variety of roles? Those are things that are going to be interesting to watch and see as well. His talent, though, is certainly there, as is his size, and he has good experience, too. So I fully expect him to make a noticeable difference in some way next year. It's just going to be interesting to see in what capacity he does so. Brings me to my third question, and that is the defense noticeably improved? This one to me is another big question, because at times last season the defense was just clearly outmanned, and it held Arkansas back in a lot of ways. Not only did it put a lot of added pressure on the offense to consistently perform at a high and elite level, but also on the defensive staff and the play calling duties particularly, because of the physical limitations of the team at certain positions. Particularly corner was the most glaring to me. I mean, in a prior video I did on Arkansas, I touched on how the incoming transfer additions to the secondary particularly should lead to a much improved defense next season, just purely based on the physical ability that they're going to get alone. Just the raw athletic talent that they're going to be adding there versus what they had. But the real question I have for this defense, though, is how well can they rush the passer and stop the run? Any defense can mostly scheme one way or the other to either scheme up a good quarterback pass rush or scheme to focus on stopping the run. But either way, you make yourself vulnerable. If you scheme really hard to rush the passer, you're going to have large rushing lanes because as your gap integrity begins to fall apart as a defense. And if you scheme to stop the run, then you're not going to get that elite pass rush you need to get, and you're going to get diced up down the field. And so you have to have elite players up front, particularly, who can both rush the passer and stop the run on their own. They don't need to be schemed into the perfect position and get the perfect one-on-one favorable matchup for them to win. They need to be able to just win naturally on their own, win organic matchups like that. And I don't know if Arkansas has that guy. That's the biggest question for me with the defense is, does Arkansas really have that this year as a unit? Do they have a dude who can just take over up front and ruin an offense's game plan? I'm not really sure, to be honest. Landon Jackson has potential, but he's very much unproven, and he's still rehabbing from an injury. And the returning defensive line features basically no proven pass rushers. Also, the scheme Arkansas runs on its own sort of lends itself to being susceptible to more downhill running teams to begin with. And so there's a lot of question marks to me to be answered there. Arkansas averaged 2 sacks a game last season, which I'm pretty sure was 13th out of 14 in the SEC. Not good enough if they want to really be an elite level contender in the conference. They're going to have to find some sort of way to organically generate pressure on the quarterback while not completely sacrificing the run. Because if they have to constantly scheme rushers to get open, the defense could find itself in some really vulnerable situations come this fall. Same is true of the run defense. Arkansas really struggled to stop the run a lot last season at times, especially against teams like Georgia and Alabama. And that is partially due to the scheme and the setup of their defense. But that's no excuse. You have to be able to stop the run in this conference. So I'm going to be very interested to see how that pans out. A lot of pressure is going to be put on the guys up front for Arkansas, particularly defensively. And this spring will be the best time to see if somebody's going to step up and take real charge of that defensive front. Brings me to my fourth question, and that is, does the offensive line play continue to elevate? Now, under Sam Pittman, offensive line play is basically expected to be good at the very bare minimum and elite most of the time. And Arkansas has some absolutely massive offensive linemen on their team. They have multiple guys over 340 pounds, multiple guys over 6'8". That's exactly the style of offensive line that Sam Pittman loves. That massive offensive line was the key to a lot of their success in the running game last season, and they're going to need that dominance to continue if they want to field an even better offense this upcoming year. The big question on the offensive line right now is at left tackle, where there isn't really a for sure starter yet. And the development of that position will be crucial going forward. Luke Jones seems to be the odds-on favorite for the job, but we'll have to see how that goes during the rest of spring. But regardless of what guys end up on the field and where, the hallmark of any Sam Pittman-led football team is going to be a big physical offensive line that should just be able to really dominate, and they're going to need that in this upcoming season to really be a strength of the offense. Last year, the pass protection was good. It wasn't great. It had room for improvement. The big question here isn't really a matter of the offensive line just dramatically improving like it was some big weakness last year, but rather if they can go from what was a really good unit last year to a great unit this year that could really lead the offense in a lot of ways in the future. And if they can, that offense is going to have a much better chance of succeeding to an even higher extent than in previous years, and it's going to be a huge help to KJ Jefferson and the running backs. Bringing me to my final question now, question number 5 is, can Sam Pittman and Arkansas just stay on track? This last question for me to see this spring is just, can they keep the team focused and working hard? After last season's somewhat unprecedented success for Arkansas, they're not going to surprise anybody this year like they did in some ways early on last year, and they're going to have to work even harder this offseason to improve upon what they did last year. And I'm not saying that they're not ready to do that or that they don't know that, but it's one thing to know you need to do it, and it's another thing entirely to actually do it. Now, Sam Pittman has been around success in the past. He knows what it takes to truly compete on a national level. But being the head man is a whole different ballgame than being a position coach in that situation, and so that'll be interesting to see how he handles it. I have faith personally in his ability to keep the same edge that the team had last season and keep improving on that going forward. But with the added stresses and distractions of success from last season and the natural tendency to just kind of want to pat yourself on the back a little bit after how great of a season Arkansas really had last year, kind of coming out of nowhere for some people, there's undoubtedly going to be new challenges for Pittman and his staff and really the entire team to face with that added little bit of complacency in the back of your mind. And how they respond to those challenges will really largely determine how great they end up being in the long run. If I trust anyone to lead Arkansas, though, to even more success in the future, it is Sam Pittman. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Let me know down below in the comment section what questions you guys have for Arkansas football heading into this spring, and what you think of my questions that I asked, what you think the answers will be. Also, if you made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a like because it helped out the channel tremendously, and subscribe for more college football content in the future, so I'll continue to be uploading very regularly going forward. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.